Good evening, everybody. My name is Jiro Tamura, and today I actually teach leadership and negotiation at Shizenkan University. And today I would like to do an introduction session. Leadership is a very important part of Shizenkan education, and there are many ways of thinking about leadership. And the reason why I do leadership and negotiation is negotiation ability, communication ability is very, very important in exercising leadership. So what I want to emphasize is I call this leadership basics. It's a basic learning that you need to know if you want to exercise leadership. And that's why I call it leadership and negotiation. Now, negotiation is an area of learning that started from Harvard University, but we also have a very long Japanese history. And I want to touch upon these kind of things in my 50-minute lecture. Thank you for joining, and please listen to this lecture. Now, first, I put the word leadership, which I have just explained a little bit about. And I want to share a little bit about the Japanese society. And in many societies, we have an education where one correct answer is what we are asked for through elementary school, junior high school, and in Japan, entering the university, it becomes a fierce kind of competition. And what we are doing is seeking for one correct answer. But we have in the world liberal arts education. In Japan, we are talking about liberal arts education. However, in Japan, unlike some of the other countries, liberal arts is not like main type of education. Once again, listening to your teacher's lecture and answering the correct answer is what we are asked for in order to get into the university. And even at the university, unfortunately, same thing is asked. So what happens is once we get into the society, and this is not only Japan, but I would like to explain to you the example of Japan, is many of the people lack communication skills. I think there are many Japanese people that are very well educated and very talented. Unfortunately, because of the lack of communication skills, the performance is not that great. Now, also, as I said, you're in school, you learn about right answers. But in the society where you are experiencing, this is not only in Japan, but all around the world, there's no like clear answer. There are multiple answers. You don't know which one's correct. Or you might have to choose a lot of different answers in order to overcome the problem. Now, we are not, including myself, getting this type of education. When I was a student, I didn't really get this type of education. But I've learned that, and most of you also in the society know that these type of, the logical communication skills and what I will touch upon, adaptive leadership, which is if you communicate with your peers and if you adapt their ideas, your leadership will get better. I will mention this a little bit later. These type of skills or leadership skills are what is necessary. So how do you get to that point? Liberal arts education was one way because there was a dialogue between the professor and the student. Now, if you have had that experience, you might have fairly good communication skills. But for those people who haven't had that experience enough, the big problem is we don't have that skill. We're just put out in the society and we find out, hey, there's no right answer. What am I supposed to do? Well, what you have to do is communicate, exercise leadership. How? This is why I go into this idea about leadership basics. But let me show you one other example. Robert Teagan, famous professor at Harvard University, has mentioned about this concept. And there's 5 stages. It's like you learn in like sociology. First stage is your early childhood, intuition stage. Okay, you're trying to survive. You try to survive somehow by usually looking at your parents and so on. Then you're put into school and you start to learn that you have to compete with other people. So what happens is you go into a self-supreme stage. You make a lot of effort till like your teenage days. And it looks pretty good to here. But the third stage is the problem. And why? And that is because the third stage is called the socialization stage. Here, you're trying to adapt and socialize with people. If you want to be in the community, you want to be in your company and come up with the results. So what happens? Here, let me give you an example. You either become, you make your effort to get into the fourth or fifth stage, but in many cases, you end your life career at the third stage. And that is you just socialize. And in order to survive in corporations, like some of the traditional type of Japanese corporations, all you need to do is to just fit in the system. So you don't want to, try to make any challenges or efforts. You just listen and you just abide by what you're being told to do. And that's this stage. The leadership only comes at the fourth and fifth stage. And unfortunately, in the Japanese case, many people end up here. And they even become leaders and still do not exercise leadership. They're just socialized, unfortunately. Yes, Japanese leaders, unfortunately, in many cases, are people who are able to do a reasonable management. Management they can do, but they can't exercise leadership. Why? Because you don't make that effort. You need to self-direct, get into the self-directed stage and self-transformation stage, which is something I won't be able to talk too much right now, but this is the goal you want to get it to. Here, you can do it at a younger stage. The fifth stage is something you will learn from more experience. So it's not just education, but these fourth and fifth stages where you want to get to. Now, in order to make it simple, I, again, once said leadership basics. Now, leadership basics, why? Because you want fundamental skills of communication. And today, unfortunately, I can only give you the topics and only give you the lecture on negotiation. But I think listening ability is the core. And then you need to have dialogue ability, dialogue skill, and then negotiation skill and persuasion skill. These are the four elements necessary for your leadership skill, the basic skills. Again, what am I saying is basically this is all communication in four segments. And I call it 4-5-4 formation, almost like a soccer team formation. Why? Because there are 4-5-5-4 elements you need to know in order to exercise this communication skill, which I'm sorry, I'm going to only focus on negotiation today because of the limited time. This is a whole big concept, which I would be happy to share with you if you show interest and come to Shizenkan. That's what I'll be talking. But for today, I would just like to focus on the negotiation part, okay? All right. So what is negotiation? Now, the four elements that I have mentioned are elements that develop from the negotiation expertise. So what you need to know is probably if I again, for today's time and limited time to give you a lecture, I would like to just focus on the negotiation part. And this was developed by the Harvard Law School professor, Roger Fisher, which I was fortunate enough to learn while he was teaching there. It was a fascinating class. And the reason is just one. There's no lecture. You're negotiating all the time. And you're giving cases, you keep on negotiating. And step by step, you get into difficult negotiation, difficult conversation. And you learn through the process that what he has been saying is very, very important. He said something important, which is negotiations is a study for problem solving. You're not negotiating to win or lose. You want to solve the problem that's out there. If you're a seller and if you're a buyer, there's a conflict. There's no way you can just say, okay, whatever you say, I'll do. You only say that when you think you're a victim of a power play. You might say, okay, I'll do whatever you say. But usually when you're negotiating, you want to win, but the other side wants to win. So what happens is a win-lose game. And that's something he taught, saying that's a bad idea. You have to go into a win-win mode. How do you do that? Let's problem solve together. There's a problem out here when we're negotiating. We want to solve that problem with our communication, is what he has said. And that has become a kind of a fundamental core part of leadership education. Okay, this is Professor Fisher, the founder of the program on negotiation, which is the Harvard negotiation project, which is about 50 years old. And he was actually some of the president's advisor in negotiation. So his ideas were really good. Why? Because he was saying, again, win-win, trust building. All these basic things that you don't hear in negotiation, tactics, you only hear when you are trying to build trust and get into a win-win, mode. And the interesting thing is, I want to jump. Why am I teaching this in Japan? Of course, I was very stimulated with Roger Fisher's education, but I also found similarity with the Japanese omi merchants, Sampo Yoshi. I don't have the time to explain too much, but omi merchants, you can imagine like the Japanese trading companies, Sogo Shosha. Do you see that kind of entity around the world? Probably no. You only see it in Japan, and there are a number of them. Why? Because the basic principle is you want to build trust. You want to be loyal, faithful when you're negotiating. Now, it might not work in many countries, but in Japan, it worked for a long time, fortunately. But recently, it's not going to work that easily. Why? Because we have become internationalized. There's a lot of competitors, foreign people coming in, and sometimes your basic understanding of Sampo Yoshi. Sampo Yoshi means three sides benefit: seller, buyer, and the society benefits. How do you negotiate that way is something that Roger Fisher said in a US way. I think the Japanese were doing a similar thing by a concept called Sampo Yoshi. Okay, so what is that? Now I'd like to get into the negotiation part, jump to that part. There are three things I want you to keep in mind. One is logic, two is preparation, and three is on the field. Logic is you need to understand the logic, not tactics, logic. What does that mean? Very simple way of explaining is if you want to sell well to the buyer, you need to understand the buyer's logic, and vice versa. If you're a buyer, you need to understand the seller's logic. Basically, you need to communicate. And if you communicate well, you will get a better understanding of each other's logic. And that's the logic of negotiation, understanding each other's logic. Now, of course, sometimes you are dealing with people who only think about tactics. Still, you make the effort to say, okay, I want to get into a more sustainable relationship with you. I'm not here just to do a day deal with you. Are you going to communicate in the right way or not? Is the way you need to negotiate. You want to solve problems with the person in front of you, and you're not fighting to actually win or compete to win. So, having said that, it's still difficult. So I actually teach, this is the most important part, is how to prepare. Preparation, 5 steps, SMART. If you remember my formation, 4-5-5-4, in negotiation, there's 5 steps you want to keep in mind. And that's something I will mention a little bit today. And then on the field, what you do is, because you want to know the other side's logic, you need to do your Sampo Yoshi. And that is, again, try to understand what the buyer wants to do, or try to understand what the seller wants to do. And also try to understand what the society needs. And that will be a very important thing that you need to do on the field. Now, let me explain each one, because kind of vague, introduction will not be easy for you to understand. So let me go one by one, okay? Okay, now this is the logic part. In most negotiations, this is what you encounter, and that is the blue person might say, okay, if you reduce to $3,000, then we can probably accelerate our conversation. So we'll get a deal. Basically, he's asking for a $1,000 discount. But usually, if you have negotiation experience, usually that's what happens. People will ask for a discount. And because that person's goal is to get a better price. And the vice versa is the same way. Seller wants to get a higher price. A buyer wants to get a lower price. This person is a buyer, so he wants a lower price. Then, if you're not prepared, this is where the preparation comes. If you're not prepared, you just take that message and start thinking, oh, what should I do? The person is asking for $3,000, and I don't know if that's a right thing, but he's saying $3,000. So what should I do? Why don't I settle for $3,500? This is unfortunately a very unwise decision. But this is what we all do. Why? Because we want to get the wrong idea that in order to be faithful or in order to win trust is to listen to what the other side is asking you to. So you say, okay, $3,000. No. How about the mid price, $3,500? So that's what he says. So is this a good negotiation? You all probably know that it's not a good negotiation, but you're probably doing it. Okay, so what's the problem here? There's a notion called heuristics. Now, negotiation with bargaining techniques, these are tactics, and these are often used by heuristics, which means cognitive bias of deciding based on previous experiences or given judgment, that kind of bias. What's in this case, what is that? It's called anchoring and judgment based on a numerical value and conditions presented by the opponent. So here, the big mistake is the other side just all of a sudden says $3,000. Then you are stuck with the number that the other person says. So you're saying to yourself, $3,000, oh my God, $3,000. This is supposed to be $4,000. How am I going to get out of this? And because of this anchoring is actually working, you end up saying about a $500 discount. Now, you know it sounds rubbish, but again, maybe smaller discount or so, you always end up getting into this kind of conversation. What is lacking here? What is lacking here? And that is communication. You're basically thrown a numerical figure and you're just responding to that. There's no communication. Okay, so what should we do? Now, here's the preparation part, the second part. Logic, preparation, and on the field, this is the preparation part. This sounds a little bit difficult, but it's simple after you hear the explanation. You want to think about the situation and the stakeholders that are out there, and you also want to know what the mission of this negotiation is. Then you also think about the alternative. This alternative is different from the R, just to make sure. This alternative is basically saying, I'm sorry, I can't negotiate with you anymore. I'm gonna go with somebody else. You won't say it, but you're basically saying, you're ridiculous. I can't negotiate with you. Okay, so why do you position that? I will explain later, but you want to position that. Why? Because in many negotiation cases, you're like saying, okay, win-win or trust building, but the other side is always trying to undercut you with these low price or whatever. So you want to tell them, if you're going to negotiate that way, then I'm not going to negotiate with you. I thought we were going to have a long-term sustainable relationship here, and we want to solve problems in front of us, but all you're doing is using negotiation tactics. Goodbye is the position you want to make. Very important, very important. And then R and T, realistic option. Option is a very important factor that Harvard has been saying in negotiation. That is, if you only talk about price, there are no options. You either take it or leave it, or you have to take half the price or whatever. If you talk about a lot of options, there are many ways of making the price different. And that's what I'll be talking later on. Now, the target is the fifth part of the elements. Do you know why? Because we're always interested in targets. And we start communicating on targets only. And that's what happened in the case of $4,000, $3,000. By the way, that example, I'm going to start talking in the latter part, and that is an automobile manufacturer with the automobile part supplier negotiation on a main part. And he was asking for that discount. So target becomes so important in negotiation that you forget the top four. That's why I'm saying it in a formation system, because don't jump to the target. Talk about the four important elements. And if they're not going to be willing to talk, you're going to force them to talk. And that's important. That's negotiation. That's communication skill. Okay, now this part seems a little bit difficult, so I'll explain it a little bit later. First, situation. You want to know the situation. You want to grasp the situation. Of course, you want to grasp this. But are you mainly focusing on trying to understand what the other side is intending or thinking? Probably yes. But how are you going to know what the other side is thinking? You can't spy on them. There's nothing you can do. But you're always trying to guess that the other side is going to come like this, or this. The boss is a very tough guy, so they're going to ask for a discount or whatever. We're going to have to fight. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. If you want to prepare, you want to grasp your situation. Why? Because when you go and negotiate, you want to tell them, this is the way we think, and we want to send that message to you. Now you respond to that message. This is the very important sampo yoshi or wise agreement, where you're telling your situation to the other side, and you should, in reciprocal manner, give us your information. Then we can solve the problem together. So what I would propose you to do today, kind of a limited time, just think about your boss or your customer competitor, or here, Y engineering division. Again, this is an automobile parts manufacturer. You are the parts manufacturer, okay? And this is the automobile company. So this is a parts supplier and an automobile company, for example. Then engineering division might be saying something to you. So you are the negotiator. What you want to do is you want to say, I am representing my company, and there are a lot of stakeholders. This is why I'm saying stakeholders, who is telling me to do this or that. And I came here to convey that message to you. And I want to work with you to solve the problem that's facing in front of us. Why does it work? Because if you go directly attacking somebody in the negotiation, you know it's going to get into a win-lose mode. What you want to do is, I'm conveying my boss's idea. My boss is saying this and that. I have to tell you that. That's what my boss is saying. Or I have to tell you the engineering division is saying this or that. Or these kind of stakeholder analysis will help you communicate in many ways. Instead of saying, I think that's outrageous or whatever, is a very stupid way of conveying message. You want to talk about the players and tell them the whole company's situation, what they are telling me to tell you. Then what happens is, if you convey that message right, this is the important part of smart formation, and that is the other side probably has to reciprocally say something. If they don't say it, then you should jump to the A, which I will mention later. If they start saying it, then you say, oh, thank you very much. That's the way you're thinking. Okay, then can I add you a little more, give you information? That's the information exchange that you want to do. Okay, that's S. But if you're interested in information exchange, there's one thing you want to keep in mind, and that is the mission. You negotiate here, you probably focus a lot on the price and so on. Why? Because you're getting head on. But if you are able to tell this partner that, hey, we're getting together to lead the world in next generation automobiles. That's what we have been doing together, right? So what are we going to do today? We are going to, for us, automobile suppliers, we are going to give you the best we've got. That's because we want to beat the other automobile companies. I want you to be the number one. And then the automobile company is going to feel, oh, right, yeah. That's what I need. Okay, then if you understand the value, then the price will be different. That information exchange is necessary. So what do you want to say? And that is, what's our mission? Why are we here together? Are we here just to talk about how low this price should be? Or are we here to see if we can make the best automobile together at a reasonable price? The latter will be the answer. So you want to talk about the mission to tell the other party that you are interested in what we can do in the long run, beyond the agreement that's what I mean. Okay, but today we're not using any cases except for this example. It might be hard for you to understand, but this is the way I do my cases. And the students actually think about these formations and they negotiate in that manner. And it tends to work out if you do it right. So this is the second part, okay? Now the third part is very interesting, and that is the alternative. Now alternative is very, very scary because this is a situation where you cannot agree. And I think the Japanese negotiators have not been good at this, because if you go out there in the world, you always have very, very tough, hard negotiators who is always going to talk about price, saying, you know, yeah, I can have another company give us a better price. So if you don't agree with this price, just leave. They might say that. Then you should be also courageous enough to say the same thing to the other person, saying, oh, I'm sorry, if that's the way you're going to negotiate, then we have to just say goodbye to you. Usually that doesn't happen. Why? Because you're not prepared and you're scared. So you say, oh, I'll give you a discount. Okay, what do? The alternative is, let me explain to you this Harvard concept, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, what is this? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. You want to give a discount? You will give a discount to a certain extent. But if this is the way they want to negotiate, you have to tell them, here, alternative option, no deal, or maybe a new contract with a different company. Your goal, your mission is maintaining mid-long-term relationship with company A, making the best cars. That's what you're trying to convey to the other party, but the other party will not be willing to listen. Unfortunately, you have to say this alternative if that is the case. And that may be the case in many situations. So for today, let me explain that alternative is something you want to hold as a position, Now, this positioning is important, and I have to tell you, this is something you don't want to exercise. You don't want to exercise. You want to keep it. But you know that the other side is going to probably scare you by giving you a tough deal. Then you tell them, if that's going to happen, I'm sorry, I have to say this is no deal. Why? My boss said so. Is the best way to get out of it. Instead of you trying to collide with the other person, you say, my boss said, if you're going to stick with this $3,000, then, and if you're trying to communicate and if you don't get to an answer, then say no and come back. Now, of course, you don't want to make the other side angry. So you have to be smart in how you communicate. I don't have the time to explain that to you. You need to do a lot of cases to understand. You basically want to hint them, give them a clue that I'm going to have to leave if this is the case. And I don't want to do that. I want to have a good deal with you. So please try to understand is what you want to say, but you have to have this position. Why? Because if you don't, then you're going to probably have to agree because you're so scared of having the other side intimidate or scare you by saying, go home. You say, okay, I will go home, is something that you want to say. We're trying to give you the best deal here. You should understand. If you don't understand, that's too bad. So that's why alternative is very important. Another contract with another company is another idea you might want to have in mind. But again, you don't have to give them the details of that. No company will talk about details with the contract with another company. So all you have to do is just give them a hint. And then they'll just hear, like, for example, a Japanese large automobile company, if they hear that US is like Tesla Motors are coming and asking us for a deal, you'll probably get scared even if you're a big Japanese motor company. You say, oh, wait. I thought you guys were always dealing with us. And then you're just like hinting that there's another company coming out is a very scaring position that you want to hint to the other side, okay? Now, you don't want to use that A too much. What you want to do is you do the S and M and then go to R and T, realistic option. Why realistic option? Because, of course, you want to give them options that are reasonable, not too costly, and then make them feel more satisfied. So, for example, I give this kind of explanation on a one-page slide, and that's the Osborne method. Alex Osborne is a very well-known businessman in the United States about 50 years ago. He actually created the word brainstorming. So I think everyone's saying brainstorming. But what he said is, in the negotiation, you want to give them more ideas. That's why he said quantity rather than quality. Of course, he doesn't really mean that. He wants quality. But if you don't give ideas, no communication will happen. So information exchange is very important, and you don't have to start, selecting too much. You want to give different ideas. And 9 checklist starts from diverting to combination. Think about the smartphone example. Cameras in there, music players in there, all in a mobile phone. And you think it's a great machine, but each invention is separate and you're just combining. So this type of idea is very necessary in having a talk with the other side. Now, target is the last part that I would like to touch upon, but you're all interested in targets, of course, because that's like the norm or the mission that you're told, your narrow mission. Your real mission is to tell them we want to have a big and great relationship. But the narrow mission is usually the money. So what you want to do is you want to negotiate and try to understand what the zone of possible agreement is. It's not easy, but you need to communicate. Sometimes you don't communicate and try to guess. But the best way to do that is when you give discount, please make sure you tell them, okay, I have to change the spec. There are 5 great specs features here. I'm going to take one away and I'll give you $3,500. That's what you have to say. If you look at a negotiator, smart negotiators around the world, they don't give discount without any condition. They usually give discounts by saying, okay, let me drop 1 spec down, then I can give you the discount. Why? This is a more faithful negotiation because the first price you're giving them has to be trustworthy. If you're discounting by the other side's, intimidating you, scaring you, then you're basically, your price is, doesn't have any meaning. So you want to make a discount by changing your spec. Okay, now because of the time is running out, let me try to summarize this. SMART. Now the first S and M is you're exchanging the information in a reciprocal manner by talking about the mission. We want to work together, okay? Then realistic option. Alternative is something you don't want to exercise, but you just want to keep it, okay? Then when you share the mission, you want to talk more about the options because once you start talking about targets, you're going to get into a very, very tough negotiation. And the red line and the blue line is the safer zone, which is the horizontal axis. You're talking about quality. You're talking about options, different options. I like to customize for you. I like to product differentiate for you or blah, 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 branding. And on the other side, you have this bargaining zone and you talk about price. Unfortunately, price is something that's going to be very, very negative. Why? Because there's only high and low. But for the option zone, you can, expand as much as you can by good communication. And the more options you have, the more value you're going to think. And so the price can be higher. Now, this reverse triangle I'm drawing here is if you're going to bring the price down, make your spec lower. So if you're going to allow the other party to settle for $3,000, you're going to tell them, unfortunately, you're going to get the lowest spec here. Is that all right with you? Then I'll give it to you for $3,000. And the other side's going to say, no, that's not what I want. I want the 4,000 value thing for $3,000. Then you can start telling them, no, that's not going to work. We gave you faithful price. So if you want that value, then you pay $4,000. That's the type of communication you want to take. Okay, the third part is on the field. I gave you the 5 steps, which is this preparation. On the field, you want to communicate and focus on interest, not positions. This is Harvard's another important point. Position means seller or buyer. Now, what does that mean? You're basically focusing on positions. If you're a seller, what you want to say is what your mission tends to be in the narrow perspective, give high price. And if you're a buyer, if your mission is only narrow, you only ask for a lower price. So that's position. When you say focus on interest, that leads to this option part. I am interested in this kind of parts. And I will kind of introduce that after this. These kind of parts, then you say, oh, if you want those kind of parts, okay, I'll give you those kind of parts, options. You didn't like the spec I was giving you, so we'll give you different specs. Then will you agree on the price? This is the way you want to do a value negotiation. That is a win-win, value creating negotiation. Once again, one quick way of explaining is price only should relate to the value. If you talk price versus price, it's meaningless. If you talk about value and say, how much are you going to put on this value? Is it $3,000? No, it's $4,000. This is the way you want to communicate. But usually they don't really care. They don't want to talk about the elements, the contents. So you get into a win-lose negotiation. Another aspect is separate the people and the problem, which is very important. This is the emotional part. But today I don't have the time. In actual cases that we do in class, we get into also emotional stages with role play, which is very interesting. How do you actually separate the problem with the people? You get angry at the other person, but why are you getting angry at the other person? Because the issue, the problem that they're talking is kind of unreasonable. Then you should not get angry at that person. You should get angry at the problem. So you should tell the other side, I don't like this idea that you are giving me. It's not that I don't like you. I don't like the problem. Now, can you do that? Usually you can't. Emotional problems are very difficult. But if you become a good negotiator, you will start learning whichever type of person comes in front of you, you will still have the same type of negotiation and same type of answer in the end. This is also some interesting training that we do, where you play a role of a kind of a bad guy, and you play a role of a good guy, and the negotiation issue is the same. You could probably imagine the result. If you're negotiating with a bad guy, you get totally angry, and you say, okay, I don't want to deal with you, whatever. But if you negotiate with a good guy, you're going to say, oh, this is a great deal. Thank you very much. But the issue is the same. But the role player is, intimidating, making you feel angry. Very interesting. If you do these like role plays, role simulation, you start understanding the reality is something you might, I don't want to say it in a kind of bad manner, but you might start like laughing, saying, oh, this is the way people tend to negotiate. Why? Because that bad guy role is, in reality, certain people use that role to make you get angry and get a better deal, or make you get scared. For example, if I'm a negotiator that would start like getting really angry at the offer that you give me, and if I get in a position that I can power play on you, what would you do? You would start thinking, oh, this guy's getting angry, he doesn't like the idea. well, maybe I should listen to him because he might just, walk out. So you start saying, okay, how much do you want? Okay, if you use emotions in the wrong manner, you can get good results if you don't understand this notion. Good results is, I'm sorry, for you, it's a bad result. Good result for the guy who gets angry, who uses emotions. So emotions can be actually used. If you get really emotional, then it's a different story and you shouldn't get emotional. So that's something you will also learn. I don't have that much time to explain. Now let me get into towards the end, and that is, I mentioned about two factors, but the first factor is the most important part. The second part is something you want to take time to understand it, overcoming emotions. The first factor is what? Is I mentioned about understanding other person's logic. If you look at these Venn lens, what do you see? My interests and benefits versus opponent's interests and benefits. When you start talking only about price, your communication is very limited. But if you start talking about what's my interest, can I give you a little bit using that smart S and M and R? S and M, you give them the situation. You talk about your mission, and then say, I'm really interested in giving you a better car. Again, better car parts. That's why we worked on the friendly cars or AI highly tuned cars. The other side should say, oh, that's what I'm interested in. Are you going to give me that? Yeah, we're going to give you the best we got, and it's probably the best in Japan. Or something like that is where you want to communicate. Not on the price in the beginning. You want to talk about the value. Okay, what does that mean? Here, all of a sudden, you're going to see a lot of elements. And the reason is today, I was not able to give you the time to read the case and think about it. So this is just the answer of an automobile manufacturer, automobile parts supplier. You are playing that role. For example, let's think about it in that way. Your automobile parts supplier wants to try to satisfy the automobile manufacturer. This is the automobile part manufacturer's interest, and this is the automobile company's interest. If you remember in the beginning, I mentioned about only communication these two people had were $4,000 or $3,000. That was the only communication. But if you are able to try to explain to the other side, okay, all right, you are interested in discount. I understand, but I need to know more information. I like to really talk about that. And that's the communication mode you want to get into and exercise your SM and R. And then, for example, you're concerned about declining profits, want to expand sales to new customers, or factors are lack of environmental friendly promotions. Now, if you are able to convey that message, of course, in a positive way, the other side is probably, if you listen to, they want to maybe return to number one in the industry as an automobile manufacturer, or corporate image should be improved. Supplying environment-friendly parts is an issue. So if you are able to communicate well, you come to a understanding, mutual understanding. How do you do it? You want to talk about the mission. So this purple part is the mission. You're telling the other side, we want to be the best in the next generation automobiles, eco-friendly vehicle or autonomous driving technology, AI technology. This is what we want to do. And we want to make sure that's something we can do together and make you the number one dealer for us helping you with the number one parts. And if you start talking from this mission, you're able to get into these elements, which is the realistic option part. If you're not able to agree on the mission, you might want to exchange information, try to figure out what are the options. Then you come to the mission. So what I'm trying to say here is, let me go back a little bit to this part. What I'm trying to say here is if you prepare right and be ready, you should be communicating on the mission and the option. And if you are communicating more on the target and the alternative, you're basically doing a win-lose negotiation. What you want to do is you want to kind of stay away from price negotiations as much as possible. You want to talk about value negotiation. What's the mission? You want to make the best cars, eco-friendly AI cars. Okay, we have these realistic options for you. And these are the things you want, all right? So we'll give you that. You might not be satisfied with the first spec that we have given you. If that's the reason, we'll give you other options, whatever. That will lead to a very good communication where, unfortunately, once again, this person only started by saying $3,000. I don't care about what you're saying. I just want $3,000. And you are supposed to tell them that's not negotiation. You wanted to get into a trust building, win-win negotiation, value creating negotiation, and you make that effort by going through mission and realistic option. Okay? Now, getting towards the end, we have wise agreement that Roger Fisher says, and Sampo Yoshi of Omi Merchants. They're both saying a similar thing. See, legitimate interests of each side to the extent possible is that meets both sides' interests. That's the buyer and the seller's interest. And the community interest into account, and that's the community as a whole. So Japanese three-side benefit, Sampo Yoshi means three-side benefit, is basically the same as the Harvard Roger Fisher's principle. And it is the same. Why? Because Japanese sellers also wanted to win trust, and they wanted to get a win-win. They wanted to make the other side happy. And that Sampo Yoshi is basically similar to wise agreement. And but one thing that we have to be very careful is if you remember, once again, SMART A, the Japanese negotiators were too nice. They always wanted to help the other side. So you learn the word about give and take. You just give, give, give. And what happens is they'll just take, take, take. So you're not going to do a give and take unless you communicate right. You have to communicate reciprocal, little by little. And if they're going to try to scare you, you're going to have to say no. Okay. Now, my last part in a few minutes. So I mentioned about leadership, and I mentioned about negotiation. Now, negotiation, after all, is a win-win communication. Okay. So I mentioned once again about listening, dialogue, negotiation, persuasion, 4 skills. And that's something I would like to explain to you. But today, I only talked about negotiation. But if you really think about it, the other factors are all kind of included in this negotiation. Why? Because you need to listen to the other side. But that's the most important thing. But you have to ask the questions the right manner. And usually you have to have a dialogue with the other party. Why? Because you have to tell about yourself. If you just keep on asking questions, they're going to get really angry at you, saying, well, you're just asking questions. I'm negotiating. So you want to have a listening ability, a dialogue ability to get into the negotiation mode. And towards the end, if you are giving the right type of options, then persuasion will occur. The other side will be convinced. And that's why negotiation includes the most important logical communication ability of listening, dialogue, negotiation, persuasion. So I try to just fit it into today's just one element, but it's all very importantly connected. Okay, my last slide is I mentioned about adaptive leadership. And this is the leadership that is taught at Harvard University is very important. Shizenkan University, Yoshikawa-san has mentioned about the importance of the new type of leadership education, global leadership education. We have learned that authoritative leadership is the last thing you want to do. You're not really persuading anybody. You're just forcing people to listen to you because you're in a certain position. The position is the only thing you have. If you lose that position, no one's going to follow you. That's why you want to get into the adaptive leadership and authentic leadership. And adaptive leadership is you are willing to allow the diversified opinions, listen to their opinions, and communication here. Listen to their opinions. And then with that process, you have your own ideas, your authentic ideas. which of course you want to exercise. But after you do adaptive leadership, you're allowed to do authentic leadership. Why? Because if you just want to do leadership without being adaptive, you're just being authoritative. You're just saying, my idea is the greatest idea, so you just listen to me. That's not the way it's going to work. You know that the society and the world wants adaptive and authentic leadership combined. And this is the kind of teaching that's being done at Harvard and also where I learned. And here at Shizenkan, I'm also part of this kind of leadership education. And this is one type of idea that I would like to present to the students. Why, once again, leadership and negotiations is the class. Leadership and communication is important. If you can't communicate right, you're not going to exercise leadership. And that's why adaptive leadership is the way to go for a new type of leadership. Okay, so thank you very much. I enjoyed talking to you. I'm sorry I kind of rushed through, but if you have any questions, I would be very happy to answer. Thank you very much.